is that they're really getting at. Very often as we read through the book of Job, if you've done it before, it's very easy to simply get lost in the dialogue, to get lost in the metaphors, to get lost in the things that they're talking about, and then not quite understand where their arguments are coming from. And even there have been so many times in my life that I've read the book of Job and haven't even seen what they're arguing about. And so as we cover this ground, it's important for us to take time to see the bigger picture, to get above the trees, if you will, and to see what it is that they are discussing, the theological context that they're describing, the things that they are pushing one another towards, and then trying to pull one another from. So we're going to speak as Job's third friend begins to speak in chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Then Zophar the Naamathite answered and said, "Should a multitude of words go unanswered, and a man full of talk be judged right? Should your babble silence men? And when you mock, shall no one shame you? For you say, my doctrine is pure and I am clean in God's eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you secrets of wisdom, for he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves." Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It is higher than heaven. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol. What can you know? Its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. If he passes through and imprisons and summons the court, who can turn him back? For he knows worthless men. When he sees iniquity, will he not consider it? But a stupid man will get understanding when a wild donkey's colt is born a man. If you prepare your heart, you will stretch out your hands toward him. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and let not injustice dwell in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear. You will forget your misery. You will remember it as waters that have passed away. And your life will be brighter than the noonday. Its darkness will be like the morning. And you will feel secure because there is hope. You will look around and take your rest in security. You will lie down and none will make you afraid. Many will court your favor. But the eyes of the wicked will fail. All way of escape will be lost to them. And their hope is to breathe their last. So Zophar takes up just the same argument. The three friends all come with the same perspective of suffering with Job. And so as they seek to comfort Job, if you will, they seek to draw his attention to why he is suffering. And in their theological understanding, why Job is suffering is because Job has sinned. It's the concept of karma, if you will, that this thing that they're wrestling with is if you do good, you should get good from God. That's just. If you do bad, you will get bad from God, and that, again, is just. So the problem with that ideology in the concept of Job is that Job has not done wrong. In fact, Job was called blameless and upright. Job has done all the right things in his life to earn favor with God, and that got him riches, and that got him children, and that got him comfort and security in this life. Up until those 2 fateful days where Job loses everything and then even loses his health. Zophar starts this argument with, listen, because of the extent of your sin, as we see, by the extent of your suffering, you shouldn't even be alive right now. Boy, that's comforting, isn't it? What good friends Job has. But as we talked about, whenever we introduce these three friends and the concept of how comforters should come to those who are suffering, these men have now reached the point where they are angry with Job. Their frustration is starting to come out. The previous, Bildad, has also condemned his children as being sinners and therefore worthy of the death that they received. It escalates now to not only did they deserve that, which we do not know, but now Job must have made God so angry that he too deserves death. Right? Because these men highly value life as being a gift from God. These men have come with a certain theological perspective, and one that they are closed to any other interpretation of the world and how God interacts with it. And so therefore, as Job continues to argue that their theological perspective is off and wrong, now they're getting angry. Because how could they have gotten God wrong when their theological perspective has gained for them favor and influence and riches and long life? So again, the argument is not different for Zophar as it is from Bildad and the other friend. But he goes after Job once again, and even at the end continues this theme of, if you will just repent. If you will just turn and admit that you're wrong, admit that you're not blameless, admit all of these things that we've been saying about you, then God will give you good again. And as many of us would like to dismiss Job's friends as just being off and wrong, so many of us come to God with that very same perspective. Many of us, we've been in churches or heard messages very much along those lines, especially one that would be evangelistic in their nature. Your life is going wrong. You don't quite know why you feel the way that you do or why things happen to you the way that they do. Come to Jesus and find all the answers. Come, walk the aisle, pray the prayer, and everything will be better for you because Jesus loves you. So many times in our lives and depending on the church context that you grew up in, we have heard these messages before and we want to buy into them. Why? Because they're easy for us. And not only are they easy for us, they make us feel really good. It feels really good to accomplish something, doesn't it? Feels really good to work hard and to get stuff for ourselves. The American dream. It feels really good to have started with nothing and then you end up with something because you have worked for it and you have earned it. And so many of us, we want that to carry over into our relationship with God. As if He owes us good because of the good that we have done. The problem with that, obviously, is the Scriptures and then just simply life in general. Job is given to us early on in world history to help us know that fallacy is so wrong and off, and we see good people all the time and all throughout history suffering despite the good that they've done. And so Job again argues in chapter 12 and 13. Job chapter 12 verse 1 says this, "Then Job answered and said, 'No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know such things as these? I am a laughingstock to my friends. I, who called to God and He answered me. A just and blameless man, am a laughingstock. In the thought of one who is at ease, there is contempt for misfortune. It is ready for those whose feet slip. The tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke God are secure, who bring their God in their hand. But ask the beasts, and they will teach you. The birds of the heavens, and they will tell you. Or the bushes of the earth, and they will teach you. The fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind. Does not the ear test words, and the palate, as the palate tastes food? Wisdom is with the aged, and understanding in the length of days. With God are wisdom and might. He has counsel and understanding. If he tears down, none can rebuild. If he shuts a man in, none can open. If he withholds the waters, they dry up. If he sends them out, they overwhelm the land. With him are strength and sound wisdom. The deceived and the deceiver are his. He leads counselors away stripped, and judges he makes fools. He looses the bonds of kings and binds a waistcloth on their hips. He leads priests away stripped and overthrows the mighty. He deprives of speech those who are trusted and takes away the discernment of the elders. He pours contempt on princes and loosens the belt of the strong. He uncovers the deeps of darkness and brings deep darkness to light. He makes nations great and he destroys them. He enlarges nations and leads them away. He takes away understanding from the chiefs of the people of the earth and makes them wander in trackless waste. They grope in the dark without light, and he makes them stagger like a drunken man. Behold, my eye has seen all this. My ear has heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you, but I would speak to the Almighty. And I desire to argue my case with God. As for you, you whitewashed with lies, worthless physicians are you all. Oh, that you would keep silent, and it would be your wisdom. Hear now my argument, and listen to the pleadings of my lips. Will you speak falsely for God, and speak deceitfully for him? Will you show partiality towards him? Will you plead the case for God? Will it be well with you when he searches you out? Or can you deceive him as one deceives a man? He will surely rebuke you if in secret you show partiality. Will not his majesty terrify you, and the dread of him fall upon you? Your maxims are proverbs of ashes. Your defenses are defenses of clay. Let me have silence, and I will speak. And let come on me what may. Why should I take my flesh in my teeth and put my life in my hand? Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Yet I will argue my ways to his face. This will be my salvation, that the godless shall not come before him. Keep listening to my words, and let my declaration be in your ears. Behold, I have prepared my case. I know that I shall be in the right. Who is there who will contend with me? For then I would be silent and die. Only grant me two things. Then I will not hide myself from your face. Withdraw your hand from me, and let not dread of you terrify me. Then call, and I will answer. Or let me speak, and you reply to me. How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. Why do you hide your face and count me as your enemy? Well, you frighten a driven leaf and pursue dry chaff. For you write bitter things against me, and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths. You set a limit for the soles of my feet, and man wastes away like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten. Job's argument is this. In chapter 12, he points again to the sovereignty of God over all things. And again, this is something that his friends would not dispute, except for then how God sovereignly operates. That God not only gives good to those who have done good and gives bad to those who have done bad, but for some reason, God continues to allow that those who have done wrong or those who are wicked or evil have also received good. And those who are good and have been righteous before him also receive bad. So there's a bigger God at work in the world. And of course, Job mocks his friends in their perspective by saying, listen, if you go and talk to a fish, he'll explain it to you better than you're explaining to me. Like, we don't even have to go to the fish. Look, there's a bush right here. Talk to him, and he's going to let you know that God works bigger than you think he works. And Job knows this because Job believes that he is right. Job is fully confident that he has in his life been obedient to God by doing good. It is not a stretch to suggest that Job, out of love for God and God's goodness, has acted rightly. Job has not, as is the wrong way of doing religion, has not believed he has purchased God's love by his goodness, but rather out of love for God has Job's righteousness been manifested. Now, this does not mean that Job has not misunderstood the nature of the blessings he has received from God. Because Job, out of love for God, was willing to obey God, and then, as Job obeyed God, he saw that God blessed that obedience. And God blessed that obedience by giving to Job riches and favor and children and influence. And indeed, as we see God work throughout history and throughout the scriptures, we see God acting this way. We see God giving to those who are lovingly seeking to be obedient to him, giving them power and influence that go far above their capabilities. We see God orchestrating things on behalf of those who love him. But we also see those who don't have the material success. So, much like Job, we must come to the understanding that this God that we serve is much bigger than a lot of the frameworks we want to put upon him. And Job wrestles with this because he knows, as has been confirmed in his life and in his experience in walking with God, that he has done rightly by God and yet has received this suffering. And thus, chapter 13, where Job says, I would rather stand before God and he kill me in trusting that I have lived out of love for God than to admit that somewhere my righteousness was sin. I would rather stand before the righteous judge of the earth and have him judge me by my actions. Though he slay me, yet my hope is in him. Now here's where Job is off in his perspective of God. Because Job does not yet understand, not yet, that God will give suffering to help us better understand our lack of righteousness on our own. God will give us suffering that we may come to understand our desperate need for him above all other things. And there is nothing physically that we can do in our lives to get something from God, to earn something from God, as if he owes us something now because we gave him this, because obviously he needed that. I don't know that we can say with what we see of Job that Job believed that God needed him to do something, but rather he absolutely believes that by his righteous acts he has earned good from God. which leads to much of his confusion and frustration that now he has received suffering and pain and loss. And yet Job says, I would rather stick with putting myself before my God. And if he slays me, he slays me. I would rather put myself at his mercy than somehow admit that all of my love for him has been in vain. And here we must pause and ask ourselves why we would rather choose to see our work for God in vain than simply submit ourselves to the God of the universe. How many of us in our suffering, in our affliction, in things that have happened in our lives that we did not want and certainly did not feel like we deserved, how many times have we questioned the very goodness of God instead of saying, okay, I don't get this, but I'm with you? See, even though Job is wrestling and even though Job is angry and frustrated, he is not leaving this God. He may confess his misunderstanding of who this God is. He may confess that he doesn't know why God is doing this. He may call God unjust, but he is sticking with God. The heart of the sufferer in our suffering must always turn to God for answers. Indeed, this is a sign that we are his. When in our suffering and in our struggle, we turn to him for our answers, believing that he will, in time and in his way, be comfort to us, instead of what our natural tendency is, and that is to run from him, to find something else to give us comfort, to find some other theological concept to help us unpack this or put another just additional framework to God instead of just coming to him to seek him. Job wrestles with a new concept of God for his life. A new understanding of how God works and how God moves. And yes, he wrestles with frustration. He wrestles even with anger. He says things that he shouldn't about God because out of his suffering he speaks. But Job does not leave him, but rather Job continually wants to come before him. Job continually wants to be in his presence that he might come to understand how God is working and moving in his life. But again, we come to the understanding that Job's theology is incomplete because God has not fully revealed himself or this life, as we see in Job chapter 14. Starting in verse 1, man who is born of a woman is few of days and full of trouble. He comes out like a flower and withers. He flees like a shadow and continues not. And do you open your eyes on such a one and bring me into judgment with you? Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? There is not one. Since his days are determined and the number of his months is with you, and you have appointed his limits that he cannot pass, look away from him and leave him alone, that he may enjoy like a hired hand his day. For there is hope for a tree. If it be cut down, then it will sprout again, and that its shoots will not cease. Though its root grow old in the earth, and its stump die in the soil, yet at the scent of water it will bud, and put out branches like a young plant. But a man dies and is laid low. Man breathes his last, and where is he? As waters fail from a lake, and a river wastes away and dries up, so a man lies down and rises not again. Till the heavens are no more, he will not awake, or be roused out of his sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath be past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come. You would call, and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands. For then you would number my steps. You would not keep watch over my sin. My transgression would be sealed up in a bag, and you would cover over my iniquity. But the mountain falls and crumbles away, and the rock is removed from its place. The waters wear away the stones. The torrents wash away the soil of the earth, so you destroy the hope of man. You prevail forever against him, and he passes. You change his countenance and send him away. His sons come to honor, and he does not know it. They are brought low, and he perceives it not. He feels only the pain of his own body, and he mourns only for himself. Here we see the incompleteness of God's revelation to man. Yet in human theological understanding, there was not yet the fullest concept of an afterlife, of what God was preparing for his people. Sheol here, in this patriarchal period, it mostly just means a holding place, a place where the dead go to just be after they've passed on from this life, which is why Job and his friends make so much about this life in their arguments. There was not yet hope for what was to come after, as we have hope for what will come after because of what Christ has done and shown us in his resurrection. So the reward for goodness was to be here in this life, not in the life to come. So as Job wrestles, he wrestles with wondering why God, if goodness and righteousness means nothing for this life, why God would even bother to mess with mankind at all. Why God would give some form of standard of obedience for us to live by. If all we have is here, and he's not going to honor the good receiving good and the bad receiving bad, why would he even bother at all to interact with mankind? Job struggles here in this chapter with his ignorance of what is to come. And that ignorance pushes him to focus on what is present and passing, instead of what is to come and is eternal. Now, this may make us wonder, why would God do such a thing as to not reveal the fullness of heaven early on so that mankind would have this thing to strive for? But in reality, they do. Because you see, both Job and his friends both know that God is not bound in time and therefore here in the passing world. God sits above it all. See, what Job and his friends miss is the striving for God that we may reach him. What Job and his friends miss is that God, in his interaction with humanity, has made a way for them to know the eternal, the one who does not pass away, the one who stands above life and death of this life, and offers himself as the reward. See, we get so caught up in our human minds about what goes on here in our lives. We get so distracted by suffering. We get so distracted by things that we want to chase after. And God is constantly calling our eyes, our hearts, our affections above it all to Himself. The glory of heaven is not golden streets. The glory of heaven is God Himself. We must be very guarded that when we imagine these concepts of heaven, that we don't think of them as just a better kind of here. A place that we don't have to get up and go to work. A place that we don't have to deal with our children. A place that we don't have to worry about traffic. I'm not saying that we have to deal with any of those things in heaven. What I am saying is that heaven glory is so much bigger than those things. The joy of heaven is not just having to not wrestle with things that we wrestle with here. It is that we get God. And too often, we ourselves get distracted by things here. We get so consumed with what people think of us. We get so consumed with what stuff we don't have. We get so consumed with so many distracting things here, and God is constantly calling our eyes heavenward. God is constantly sending us reminders that He is waiting for us. And that anything we chase here is going to disappoint us. Anything we chase in this life, whether it be comfort or security or health or whatever the case may be, if we look for it here, it will disappoint us. Jesus, before He goes to the cross, in John chapter 14, He has washed their feet. He's commanded them to love one another. He's told Peter that this is going to be hard for you, not just because I'm going to the cross, but rather you're going to deny me. Jesus in John chapter 14, starting in verse 1, says this, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Just take a moment and let that phrase sink in for you this morning. Jesus is about to go to the cross. His disciples are going to have to watch Him be arrested, beaten, and hung on a cross. And He tells them, don't let your heart be troubled. Got it, Jesus. Can do. Right? How many of us this morning have had to deal with a troubled heart? Over something. How many of us this week? Imagine if Job could have heard those words from Christ. Let not your heart be troubled. Don't get so distracted. But why? Why? Why should their hearts not be troubled? Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Let not your heart be troubled, brother and sister, because Christ has gone to prepare a place for you. What is it this morning for you that troubles your heart so often? Where is it that you have not believed that God is enough for you? Do you notice that? Let not your hearts be troubled. Why? Because you need to believe me when I say you shouldn't have a troubled heart. Believe me when I say I am enough. Believe me when I say that what I have called you to, I will make sure it's seen through. Believe me. Trust me. Because no matter what you face here, I have a place ready for you. And then he says this, and you know the way to where I'm going. Duh. Thomas, faithful Thomas, we're thankful for Thomas because he thinks like us. Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? What are the directions? What are the things we're supposed to do? What's the 12-step process to get us into the room? Got to make a reservation, right? Price line? What do we do? And Jesus said to him, I am the way. I'm the way. Right? Don't we love this verse, and yet we so often don't want it to be true? Like we love to put it on t-shirts and coffee cups and all those things, but we really don't want to live by it. We want a different way. I need answers, and I need them now. I don't need Jesus, I need answers. How many times have we operated in that in our suffering? In our struggle? Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And no one gets to the Father except through me. Job, often in his crying out, demands for the one who would be the go-between between man and God. And Jesus says, that's me. I am the way. I am the way beyond these distractions. I am the way to an untroubled heart. But do you believe me? Will you believe me? Will you believe that I'm enough in your suffering? Will you believe that I can and will give comfort even if your physical circumstances are uncomfortable. Do you believe me? Do you believe my way over your way? See, as Job wrestles with his suffering and with a new concept of God, he is being drawn to Christ, and he really doesn't even know it. He's being drawn to a God who is enough in himself. And brothers and sisters, this morning he calls you to. He calls us to that as well. No matter what you're struggling with this morning, no matter what anxiety you have, no matter how busy and overwhelmed you feel, no matter what pain or sickness or something you're dealing with, no matter what it is, Jesus says to you, don't let your heart be troubled. See, I've prepared a place for you. And I'm the way to get there. Trust me. Trust me. This struggle that you're in now is nothing compared to what I have prepared for you, my child. Trust me. Take your eyes off of yourself for just a second and put them on me. He is the way. Brothers and sisters, this morning, as we sit and hear the suffering of Job and his wrestling with God, may it be that we would not push him aside as if he's different from us. We wrestle with the very same things. We echo the very same sentiments when we fall into suffering and take our eyes off of Christ. And we should be thankful that we don't have to just blindly stumble towards Christ, but rather he has been revealed to us in his coming to earth and in the word of God that is now given to us, in the words of Christ that he speaks to us in our suffering, in our struggle, in our wondering. Don't let your hearts be troubled. I am the way. I am the truth and the life. Come to me.